John Arthur Smith. I'm from Deming, New Mexico. I grew up in Deming and graduated from University of New Mexico, but grandson that goes to New Mexico State, so my bias is in both directions on that. My wife Jeanette is a retired educator. She was also from Deming, New Mexico, and we've been married for going on 51 years. I'm an appraiser in Deming. I have a son that's an appraiser over here in the Las Cruces area, and I have another son that's in business here in Las Cruces. 4 grandchildren, and long history in southern New Mexico, and was beaten soundly by Lou Henson in high school on that, so it goes back a long way.
I'm Larry Martinez. I'm from Lordsburg. I'm a small businessman. I started my career I grew up in Albuquerque. I started my career up in Farmington with San Juan Generating Station. I entered into the mailroom and worked my way up through a couple of apprenticeships, which brought me to live in Lordsburg. So I went from Albuquerque to Farmington to Lordsburg. I've been in Lordsburg now 10 years, and I have a small business. I'm an electrical contractor there, pretty involved with the community. I feel it's important to get involved with your surroundings.
The first question is on the issue of providing driver's license to those who are in the country illegally. Do you support that legislation? And then also more broadly, are there any other changes that you feel need to be made to state law regarding people who are living in the state without coming over the border illegally?
Okay, first and foremost, I was somewhat in a small crowd because I supported Governor Martinez's position on the driver's license. I might add it was Diane Denish's position also, and I was the lone Democrat on the Senate side that supported their position. Unfortunately, the dialogue turns to the border, and of course I grew up along the border, but the fact is that from a safety perspective, from the United States perspective, and illegal driver's license being issued potentially, not potentially, but in fact they picked them up to Afghanistan people, Iraq. I think the national security is first and foremost, and as a result I'm supportive of making certain that the undocumented do not have a driver's license. Hopefully we can move in a direction where compromise will be a factor. I do know several people in a bipartisan fashion are starting to look at the Utah plan. The last thing I want for this state to do is go in the direction of the state of Arizona. That's being litigated right now, and as a result, I suspect that the Supreme Court will overturn it. My great degree of frustration is that Congress should find a way to compromise and pull together for an answer and solution that is what's best for this country and what's best for the citizens in this country. The bottom line is, I grew up along the border, and in my congressional race, nobody wanted to pay attention when I said the 2 biggest issues we're faced with. Number one is a balanced budget issue in 2001, and the other is the border issue. My neighbors are to the south, and I do want to live next door to an educated workforce, and I do believe that Congress needs to come up with some type of work permit on that. But at this point in time, I'm supportive of the governor's position and Diane Denish's position to make certain that undocumented are not granted driver's license for identification purposes.
In this past legislative session, and actually the past 2 legislative sessions, legislation was introduced that would have prevented people who are in the country illegally from being able to obtain a New Mexico driver's license. Do you support that legislation? And then more broadly, are there any other changes to the law, to state law, in terms of dealing with those immigrants who are in the country illegally that you would like to see passed?
Well, as far as going in front of the legislature, it seems like it's been there maybe on three occasions that it's been addressed, and it still hasn't gone anywhere. As far as stopping people from coming into our country and driving into our country where I live, I'm not seeing us being able to do that. So holding accountable those that are driving in our country, if that's a driver's license or whatever type of license and a code that it follows under, I think that it's important that we hold those people accountable. I'm right now just redid my insurance, and I'm paying for uninsured motorists, and I'm thinking, well, if I'm paying for uninsured motorists in New Mexico, when we're all to my registration, my driver's license requiring me to have insurance, and now I got to pay uninsured motorists, I don't think it's really fair. So I think that issue needs to be addressed, as who's driving in New Mexico should be having some type of a driver's license.
What proposals would you support to help children in the lower grades, and I think, you know, typically we're looking at third grade or lower, catch up to their peers across the country, and especially in regard to reading?
Well, pre-K education, 0 to kindergarten, it's becoming very important, very well known that education at a young age is how we're going to educate from K through 12. So if we're not addressing the issue of 0 through K, then the teachers being their budgets cut, or their demand on trying to produce a well-educated person, they're kind of falling behind. So I feel that it's important that we address the 0 to K.
Obviously, with a wife that was a retired educator, and after the Columbine disaster in Colorado, the message was sent that whatever we do has to be done at a very early age. I was one of the Senate sponsors for the voluntary kindergarten. Representative Taylor and Representative Mary Helen Garcia were the sponsors on the House side, and Senator Bedford and myself on the Senate side. And I was responsible for funding that in the Appropriation Act, and we phased that in accordingly. In addition to being one of the sponsors of the Kindergarten Act, I was also honored by the early childhood people and recognized for trying to get additional dollars into early childhood. In addition to that, we have put more money this legislative session because we had more money to put in for early childhood and directed toward early childhood. In addition to that, I was the sponsor for reading by the third grade. Now that bill did not get out of the House. The Senate bill didn't, and the House bill didn't get out of the Senate. But it alarms me when we're happy with the status quo on reading performance, and performance to be improved has to start at a very early age. But it bothers me that people want to maintain the status quo and stay the course. I do think change is in order. When you start looking at the performance of third grade reading across the state over the last 7 years, there's virtually been no change. There's a slight trend up in math, but not in reading, and this has got to change. And that's one of the reasons that I was willing to co-sponsor that bill.
With the state emerging from its recent budget crisis, what should the priorities be as we look to restore spending that had been cut before? And what areas do you think could be cut even more than they had been when the state budget was down? Or what areas would you look to cut?
Well, obviously I have a long history, and one of the few that was willing to say no to additional spending on issues that I would dearly love to have for this state, but we could not afford it. And I was willing to stand up within my own party, and I'm willing to stand up to make certain that we have responsible, efficient spending in the state of New Mexico. The areas that I think we should be most concerned with are taking place in Washington, D.C. right now, and we live in fear of what happens to federal military budgets in the state of New Mexico, and obviously we're going to be hit to a greater degree in this area with Bliss and White Sands and Holloman than other parts of the state, although Los Alamos has already been hit. I do believe we're going to have a tax structure that is extremely competitive and balanced, low rate and broad-based. And I've advocated this with the new governor before her first term, and I will be working in that direction because we've got to steer in a different course and quit relying on federal spending. Federal spending will have to be reduced.
Well, we need to improve our funding for education. We need our wages for the average workers need to be a little more fair. safe and work environments need to be readdressed. As far as areas of cutting in New Mexico, I see everybody striving. So I don't know where those cuts in any particular area, you know, other than maybe at the top that, you know, where maybe we have a top budget we're paying too much. But as far as the lower middle class, I don't see the cuts.